Xerxes is a leading manufacturer of fiberglass storage tanks. We are North America's largest manufacturer of underground storage tanks, with 6 strategically located manufacturing facilities. As motor fuels continue to change, adding ethanol and other biofuels content, the corrosive environment within fuel tanks has increased significantly. As a result, market share for fiberglass underground storage tanks continues to grow. Xerxes fiberglass underground storage tanks are built to strict manufacturing standards. Great care is taken to provide long-lasting performance and environmental safety. Quality tank fabrication must be matched by quality installation for the tank to perform as designed. Industry sources, including the Petroleum Equipment Institute, the American Petroleum Institute, and the EPA, agree that one of the major requirements for success in underground storage systems is proper installation. This training video is designed to highlight installation steps as outlined in the various sections of the installation manual and operating guidelines, but is not intended to be a substitute for understanding the broader requirements for proper installation, which are detailed in the installation manual and operating guidelines. Carefully read the entire manual, paying particular attention to the safety instructions before you begin installation. Also, you must follow all applicable codes, regulations, and standards of appropriate government agencies. You will also find the same printed installation information affixed to every Xerxes tank. We recommend that while viewing this training video, you follow along in the installation manual and operating guidelines. From now on, we will refer to this manual as the installation manual. The installation manual comes with a tank installation checklist found at the back of the manual that can serve as a step-by-step quality control guide. You should complete this checklist to assist you in following the correct procedures. When you have completed the installation, give the original checklist to the tank owner, along with the installation manual, and keep a copy for your own records. In addition to the installation manual, supplemental materials are available that may apply to specific installations and/or conditions. The supplemental materials are listed in the installation manual, and most supplemental materials are available on our website. This training video is divided into the following sections. 1. Planning for installation. 2. Handling tanks. 3. Pre-installation inspection. 4. Testing during installation. 5. Installing tanks. 6. Post-installation testing. 7. Piping, venting, and containment sumps. 8. Completing installation. 9. Review. You may find it useful to pause after each section and review the broader requirements as detailed in the installation manual and operating guidelines. Section 1. Planning for installation. The first portion of this video includes certain topics that should be considered before a tank is delivered. These include backfill material selection, excavation requirements, tank anchoring options, taking diameter measurements, and on-site air testing requirements. Refer to the table of contents in the installation manual for the particular section where these topics are discussed in greater detail. Backfill material. Using appropriate backfill material is essential to the successful installation and operation of underground tanks. Using materials other than those specified in the installation manual without our prior written authorization may result in tank failure. Generally, all backfill, from the 12-inch bedding to subgrade, must be either rounded stone or crushed stone that meets the printed specifications. Rounded stone and crushed stone materials are referred to as primary backfill materials in the installation manual. Rounded stone should be a mix of rounded particles from 1/8 inch to 3/4 inch in diameter. Crushed stone should be a mix of angular particles 1/8 inch to 1/2 inch in diameter. Refer to the installation manual for precise backfill specifications, which references ASTM material standards. Excavation requirements. Excavation size is determined based on tank quantity, tank dimensions, along with other key factors explained in the installation manual. Generally speaking, all tanks require a minimum 12-inch thick bedding of approved backfill material. Therefore, key factors for depth of the excavation include bedding, tank diameter, and the required amount of tank cover material, including any concrete or asphalt slabs at grade. Total depth of cover requirements on our tanks range from a minimum of 12 inches to a maximum of 7 feet. Key factors include whether or not the tank will be subjected to traffic loads and whether the excavation and tank will see groundwater. Refer to the installation manual for a specific minimum depth of cover requirements for petroleum tanks. Tank quantity, diameter, size, and soil conditions are key factors in determining tank spacing. In all cases, the minimum spacing distance between the tank and the sides of the excavation shall be 18 inches. In the case of more than one tank in the hole, a minimum of 18 inches between tanks is required as well. Spacing between tanks may be greater if tanks are anchored. If you use dead men for multiple tanks installed side by side, you may have to allow more space between tanks to accommodate the dead men. If the excavation is in unstable soil, for example peat, landfill, soft or expansive clay, we recommend that the tank owner seek the advice of a local foundation professional engineer. In your plans, make sure to note that spacing between tank and the side walls in unstable soils shall be a minimum of 1/2 the tank diameter. Also, if the surrounding soil is unstable, or if there is a potential for groundwater conditions to fluctuate, geotextile or filter fabric may be required to prevent migration of the bedding material into the native soil or the soil into the bedding. Anchoring tanks. We recommend that every site be thoroughly evaluated for the potential of a rise in the local water table, or of perched or water trapped in the excavation. Sufficient overburden and/or an appropriate anchoring system must be present to offset potential buoyancy of the tank. If an anchoring system is to be used, note that only our anchor straps may be used when anchoring a tank. We have different types of anchor straps options: standard straps and man-out-of-hole straps. Two common types of concrete anchors used are dead men or an anchor slab. The dimensions of the dead men and the slab depend on the size of the tank and the depth of burial, and are provided in detail in the installation manual. Consult the dimension tables in the installation manual before excavation, so you provide sufficient space. Anchor points are required in the slab or dead men to connect them to the hold-down straps that will be placed over the tank, on the ribs of the tank. Hold-down strap locations are marked on certain ribs of tanks with marked arrowheads. Plan carefully when locating the anchor points in the slab or dead men, so that they correspond with the tank ribs marked with arrowheads. Our prefabricated dead men are supplied with 3/4 inch diameter, galvanized, adjustable anchor points, and generally ship on the same trailer as the tank. Taking diameter measurements. At various stages of the installation process, you will be required to take tank diameter measurements. You will take a total of 4 diameter measurements during installation, and you will record these on the installation checklist. An initial measurement of the tank diameter will be taken before installation of the tank begins. This first measurement is used as a comparison reference for subsequent measurements in order to check proper backfill placement and to verify that the installation process is proceeding correctly. Refer to the installation manual for more information on how to take diameter measurements and the allowable tank deflection limits. On-site air testing requirements. At various stages of the installation process, there may be on-site air testing requirements. To air test tanks, you need to construct a test manifold. The air supply gauge must have a maximum full-scale reading of 15 psig. The pressure relief device must be rated to a maximum of 6 psig, or 4 psig for a 12-foot diameter tank, to reduce the risk of overpressurizing the tank. For multi-compartment tanks, you need a test manifold for each compartment. Section 2. Handling tanks. Now that we have explained some general planning considerations, we will begin discussing the installation of tanks, beginning with when the tank arrives on the job site. When the tank arrives at the job site, before unloading a tank, visually inspect it for any shipping or handling damage. You will have to sign the shipping papers provided by the driver. If any damage is observed, this must be noted on the shipping papers before signing. Refer to appendices of the installation manual to determine the dimensions and weight of your tank. Based on tank size and design, some tanks are rotated on the trailer for shipping purposes, while others are not. When the tank is not rotated, that is, when the tank is upright, use all lifting lugs to unload and install the tank. Rotated tanks have extra lifting lugs to aid in the loading-unloading process. Use the lifting lugs that are situated on top of the tank in its rotated position to offload the tank from the truck and place it on the ground. Do not wrap chain or cable around the tank. If necessary, use guide ropes or tag lines to guide the tank. Do not move the tank by rolling it. Select a solid, level area clear of debris where you can place the tank after lifting the tank off the trailer. When placed, chock the tank, for example with sandbags to stabilize it. Section 3. Pre-installation inspection. Our tanks are tested prior to shipment, but they must be tested on-site prior to installation to make sure they were not damaged during shipment. For all tanks, the first test is a visual inspection. Thoroughly inspect the entire outside of the tank, including the bottom of the tank. Rotate the tank so that you can see the tank bottom. If any damage is detected during this initial inspection or during any part of the tank install, do not attempt repairs. Contact customer service at the manufacturing facility nearest you. Section 4. Testing during installation. After the initial visual inspection, different types of tanks require different tests during the installation process. To help understand which test applies to your tank, we will begin by describing the types of tanks that we manufacture. Next, we will explain how to perform on-site air testing. Finally, we will conclude this section of the training by showing the specific tests that apply to each tank type. The space between the walls of a tank is called the interstitial space. We manufacture tanks with a dry interstitial space or a wet interstitial space, commonly referred to as dry and wet tanks. On dry tanks, there is no fluid in the interstitial space. On wet tanks, we factory fill the space with a calcium chloride monitoring fluid that is dyed blue to differentiate it from other fluids. Both types of tanks are available as single compartment and multi-compartment tanks. The installation manual provides detailed instructions for testing each type of tank, but you should note that all petroleum tanks must be air tested at some point during tank installation. Follow the instructions carefully. Now it is time to learn about on-site air testing. Always remember that air testing a tank can be hazardous to people and property. Carefully read all warnings, cautions, and notices listed in the installation manual, and always notify all people on the test site when an air test is underway. Before air testing, you will remove, clean, and re-dope all factory-furnished temporary plugs with appropriate thread sealant. Then install permanent plugs in all openings where piping will not be installed. Remember also that a service fitting is needed for the test manifold we described earlier. In multi-compartment tanks, a service fitting is needed in each compartment for a test manifold. In wet tanks, do not plug the reservoir fitting when air testing the primary tank. The test pressure must stabilize at 5 psig or 3 psig for a 12-foot diameter tank by adding or removing air as necessary. You must allow for pressure variations when tanks are subject to abrupt temperature changes. When the pressure stabilizes, you will close the valve on the test manifold and disconnect the air supply line. After the pressure stabilizes, the minimum air test duration is 1 hour if you are testing the primary tank or interstitial space. Note that you will never apply air pressure to the interstice of a wet tank. When air testing a dry tank, you must never apply pressure to the interstice directly. Those tanks come with a quick disconnect assembly connected to the interstitial monitor fitting. The assembly consists of a gauge, a valve, and a hose. This assembly is not connected to the primary tank until after the primary tank has been tested. Without releasing the pressure on the primary tank, after testing the primary tank, you will insert the hose into the quick disconnect fitting of the primary tank. This will allow air pressure to flow from the primary tank to the interstitial space. After pressurizing a tank, you will apply a soap solution to the tank to check for leaks. When soaping, watch for active air bubbles, which indicate a leak. If you are applying air pressure to the primary tank, at that time you soap only the fittings and manways. If you have pressurized the interstice of a dry tank, you will soap the entire exterior of the tank. If soaping the entire tank, rotate the tank to check the bottom. Rotate the tank slowly and carefully to avoid developing too much momentum. Make sure the tank's fittings and manways never touch the ground. Do not rotate the tank more than 120 degrees from the tank's upright position. If your air test is successful, you will carefully release the air pressure, remove the test manifold, and continue installing the tank. Now it is time to discuss the specific tests required for each tank type. Testing a wet tank. The first test for this type of tank is a visual inspection of the interior and exterior of each compartment for the presence of monitoring fluid. On the top of the tank, there is also a reservoir. Check that there is monitoring fluid in the reservoir. Measure the level and record the level on the installation checklist. If no monitoring fluid is observed inside or outside of the tank, and you have observed and recorded the level of monitoring fluid in the reservoir, you will conduct an air pressure test of the primary tank when backfill has been brought to the top of the tank. When air testing the primary tank, soap the fittings and manways. Also look for active bubbles in the monitoring fluid of the tank reservoir. Monitor the pressure for 1 hour. Remember, air pressure can never be added to the interstice for this type of tank. Testing a dry tank. Dry tanks are shipped from the factory with the interstitial space under vacuum, and are shipped with a gauge assembly attached to the monitor fitting. This allows for monitoring the tank during shipping and handling. The date that the vacuum was applied is on a label near the monitor fitting, or on the shipping papers delivered with the tank. You must record the date and vacuum gauge reading on the tank installation checklist. For these tanks, you must meet the following interstitial vacuum requirements. 1. Tank shipped under vacuum must be under vacuum for a minimum of 7 days, as indicated on the shipping documents and/or tank labels. 2. The vacuum gauge shipped with the tank reads at least 12 inches of mercury. If the tank meets both of these requirements, you may continue with tank installation. If the tank fails to meet either of these requirements, or if the tank was not shipped with vacuum on the interstice, you must air test the tank. When air testing a dry tank, you pressurize the primary tank first, soap the fittings and manways, and monitor the pressure for 1 hour. Then, after the primary tank has been tested, use the quick disconnect assembly to pressurize the interstitial space and soap the entire exterior of the tank. You must also monitor the pressure on the interstice for 1 hour. After you have either met the interstitial vacuum requirements or passed the air test, you will conduct an air pressure test of the primary tank when backfill has been brought to the top of the tank. At that time, you pressurize the primary tank, soap the fittings and manways, and monitor the pressure for 1 hour. This concludes the discussion of specific test requirements for each type of tank. If the tank does not pass these tests, or if any damage is detected during any part of the tank install, do not attempt repairs. Contact customer service at the manufacturing facility nearest you. Section 5. Installing tanks. Before beginning tank installation, take a tank diameter measurement. Record this as measurement number 1 on the tank installation checklist. You will measure the diameter again later and compare those measurements to this initial measurement. If geotextile is used, it is placed on top of a slab or under deadmen. If an anchoring system is used, it should be placed in the excavation before the tank. There needs to be 12 inches of approved backfill under the tank as bedding, including when an anchoring system is used. For certain diameter tanks, an option is for the dead men to be placed so the bottoms of the dead men are even with the bottom of the tank, that is, with the dead men placed on top of the bedding material. We are showing standard placement of dead men in this training video. If dead men are being placed on top of the 12 inches of bedding material, you may need to use different turnbuckles and/or use wire rope, depending on the diameter of tank you are installing. If water is standing in the hole, pump water from the excavation hole before placing the tank and continue pumping to maintain minimum water level during tank installation. Attempt to maintain the water level below the top of the bedding materials until the tank can be fully backfilled and ballasted. If the water level in the excavation cannot be lowered, you may have to add ballast to the tank to lower it firmly on the backfill bed. Use only enough ballast to lower the tank until backfill can be added up to the top of the tank. In a dry hole, the ballast level in the tank should always be lower than the backfill level outside the tank. After smoothing and leveling the bedding material, place the tank using the lifting lugs. If dead men are in place, center the tanks between them. Once the tank is in position, place a small amount of backfill under the sides and domes of the tank to stabilize it. If hold-down straps are used, install them at the locations marked with arrowheads on the tank. Tighten all straps uniformly until they are snug, using additional anchoring hardware, such as turnbuckles and/or wire rope. Hardware specifications for each size tank are in the installation manual. After the straps have been installed and tightened, take a tank diameter measurement to check tank deflection and record it as measurement number 2 on the tank installation checklist. Now you are ready to begin backfilling. For a successful tank install, it is critical that the backfill supports the tank, especially from the 5 o'clock to the 7 o'clock positions at the sides of the tank and under the dome tank ends. This will require handwork. Starting with a 12-inch lift of backfill, use probes to push the backfill completely under the sides and domes of the tank, but do not use metal bars. Take care to ensure that there are no backfill voids under the tank. Repeat the same process with another 12 inches of backfill. After 2 12-inch lifts are placed against the tank, you can backfill to the top of the tank without further handwork. When you have finished backfilling to the top of the tank, take another tank diameter measurement. Record it as measurement number 3 in the tank installation checklist, and determine whether tank deflection is within the allowable limits shown in the installation manual. As a precaution, many installers choose to ballast tanks after backfill is brought up to the top of the tank. Section 6. Post-installation testing. You must perform an air test on the primary tank when the backfill is brought to the same level as the top of the tank, soaping just the fittings and manways at this time. On double-wall tanks with a wet interstitial space, also check the reservoir for bubbles in the monitoring fluid. Monitor the pressure for 1 hour. If you are going to perform this air test on the primary tank while it is ballasted with water, the tank can be pressurized to the same test pressure that you would use on an empty tank. At this point, all that remains before you can backfill to grade is to add the tank accessories and piping. Section 7. Piping, venting, and containment sumps. The following are some important points with respect to piping and venting. All piping must be at least 4 inches from the bottom of the tank. The installation manual provides tables for determining various internal measurements of various types of tanks. All underground tanks and/or compartments must be vented to atmosphere. If you have a tank with monitoring fluid in the interstitial space, vent the interstitial space. A 1/4-inch diameter hole drilled in the standpipe is sufficient. If groundwater levels could reach the drilled hole, install a vent line from the standpipe. If the tank has a dry interstitial space, venting that space to atmosphere is not necessary. However, the primary tank must still be vented. When pressure testing the piping, it is very important to isolate the tank from the piping system. Pressures used to test the piping system may cause tank damage. Installing containment sumps. A containment sump is designed as a termination point for secondary piping systems. Containment sumps come in a variety of models and sizes. Installation instructions for the different models are shipped with the order. Please note that all risers, including pipe risers, must be isolated from all traffic load. Section 8. Completing installation. When the tank has been backfilled to subgrade, but before placement of concrete or asphalt, take the last required tank diameter measurement. Record it as measurement number 4 on the tank installation checklist, and determine whether tank deflection is within the allowable limits shown in the installation manual. In a tank with a wet interstitial space, the level of the monitoring fluid may have changed during backfill. Therefore, the level of the monitoring fluid must be checked and/or adjusted for proper level after backfill and top slab placement is completed. Section 9. Review. Now, let's briefly review the most important things to remember about your tank installation. Follow all applicable codes, regulations, and standards of appropriate government agencies. Inspect and perform the appropriate tests on the tank before installation. Never pressurize the interstitial space in a wet monitored tank. Never apply direct pressure to the interstitial space of a dry tank without pressure on the primary tank. Evaluate the site thoroughly for its potential to trap water and the potential of the water table to rise to the level of the tank in order to determine whether anchoring is necessary. If the soil in the excavation is unstable, allow for additional spacing and determine whether geotextile is needed. Use only approved rounded or crushed stone for bedding and backfill. If you intend to use a material other than that specified in the installation manual, you must obtain our prior written authorization. When backfilling, pay special attention to the first two 12-inch lifts and the 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock positions around the tank perimeter. Follow the installation manual instructions for preparing and attaching tank accessories. Finally, complete your checklist. Don't skip anything. Your completed checklist is an additional indication that the tank was installed correctly. Retain a copy and provide one to the tank owner. Following the basic instructions provided in this training video and given in greater detail in your installation manual and operating guidelines should result in a long-lasting quality installation. If you have questions about the installation of a tank and cannot find an answer in the installation manual or in the installation supplements, please contact technical support or your sales representative.